A wild leopard steals a lion cub. But what she does next shocked everyone. At first, it looks like pure savagery nature at its cruelest. But then, something impossible happens. Instead of killing the cub, the predator guards it, almost as if protecting it. That's when a young researcher notices something the others refuse to see. Could this predator be hiding a secret no one dares to believe? As danger closes in, the line between hunter and protector blurs, and lives are put on the line. What drives a beast to spare the life of her enemy's child? And what will it cost the people who try to uncover the truth? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The African sun beat down mercilessly on the Kalahari research camp as Clara Whitfield adjusted her binoculars for the 100th time that morning. The 26-year-old zoologist from Montana felt a familiar pang of homesickness for the wide-open spaces of her childhood. Though the sprawling savanna before her wasn't so different from the prairie she'd left behind. The camp buzzed with activity as researchers moved between the scattered canvas tents and equipment stations. Clara sat apart from the others, perched on a wooden observation platform that gave her a clear view of the surrounding terrain. She could hear snippets of conversation floating up from below, her colleagues' voices carrying on the hot breeze. "Did you see Whitfield up there again?" Dr. Peterson's voice drifted up. "Been at it since dawn. Such a waste of time," another researcher responded. "She's too caught up in the emotional side of things. This isn't a nature documentary." Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes fixed on her notebook as she recorded her observations. 6 hours of watching. 3 different predator territories mapped. Countless behavioral patterns noted. She knew her methods were different. She preferred longer observation periods, looked for subtle changes in animal behavior that others might miss. But that didn't make her work any less valid. Dr. Raymond Keene's commanding presence drew everyone's attention as he strode through the camp. His silver hair gleamed in the sunlight, his khaki clothing crisp despite the heat. Clara watched him pause to check various research stations, offering brief nods of approval or sharp corrections to the staff. "Miss Whitfield," he called up to her platform, "I trust you're not still pursuing that theory about maternal behavior patterns?" Clara gripped her pencil tighter. "The data supports it, Dr. Keene. If we look at the tracking records, we're here to study predator population dynamics, not write children's stories about animal families." He cut her off, his voice carrying that familiar note of condescension. "Focus on the numbers." Several nearby researchers smirked, and Clara felt her throat tighten. She'd earned her place here, graduated top of her class, but somehow her methods always seemed to mark her as an outsider. Too emotional, too idealistic, too young to know better. The afternoon wore on, and most researchers retreated to the shade of the mess tent. Clara remained at her post, scanning the landscape through her binoculars. The savanna stretched out before her in a patchwork of gold and green, dotted with acacia trees and rocky outcrops. This was when the animals were most active. In the quiet moments when human activity died down, movement caught her eye near a cluster of rocks known to house a pride of lions. Clara adjusted her focus, her breath catching as she spotted a familiar spotted form slinking through the grass. The female leopard was one she'd been tracking for weeks, distinctive for the old scars that marked her golden coat. Clara's hand moved quickly across her notebook, recording the time and location. The leopard's behavior was unusual, moving in broad daylight, approaching lion territory. Everything Clara knew about leopard behavior suggested this was wrong, dangerous even. The next few moments happened so fast, Clara barely had time to process them. The leopard burst from the grass with explosive speed, not toward the adult lions lounging in the shade, but toward something else. Clara's heart nearly stopped as she realized what was happening. The leopard snatched a lion cub in its powerful jaws, the tiny creature dangling like a rag doll. Instead of killing it immediately, as any normal predator would, the leopard cradled the cub almost gently. The pride erupted in roars, but the leopard was already gone, disappearing into the brush with its impossible prize. Clara's hand shook as she documented everything she'd just witnessed. This wasn't normal predator behavior. This was something else entirely. Her mind raced with possibilities, connecting this incident to other unusual patterns she'd observed in recent weeks. "Dr. Keene," she called out, her voice cracking with excitement and disbelief. "Dr. Keene, you need to see this." The senior researcher emerged from his tent, looking irritated at the interruption. Other staff members drifted closer, curious about the commotion. "I just witnessed something extraordinary," Clara explained, climbing down from her platform with her notebook clutched to her chest. "A leopard took a lion cub, but not to kill it. The behavior suggests—" "Nonsense," Dr. Keene interrupted, his face darkening. "Leopards are opportunistic killers. If it took a cub, it was for food, nothing more. But sir, the way it carried the cub, its entire approach, this wasn't normal hunting behavior. I think there might be a connection to the unusual patterns I've been tracking." "Enough!" Dr. Keene's voice cracked like a whip. "This is exactly the kind of fanciful thinking that undermines serious research. I won't have you spreading wild theories based on emotional interpretation." Clara stood her ground, though her voice quieted. "With respect, sir, observation isn't just about numbers. Sometimes we have to look deeper to understand what we're seeing." The other researchers had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. Dr. Keene stepped closer, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Clara. "You're here on a provisional basis, Miss Whitfield. I suggest you remember that before pursuing these creative interpretations of yours." His words carried a clear warning, but Clara couldn't let go of what she'd seen done. As the group dispersed, Clara climbed back to her observation post, her mind racing. The leopard's behavior didn't make sense, unless you considered the patterns she'd been tracking for weeks. The unusual movements, the attention to young animals, the protective rather than predatory behavior. She opened her notebook, flipping through pages of careful observations. Something was happening out there in the Kalahari, something that defied conventional wisdom. Clara might be young, might be dismissed as too idealistic, but she knew what she'd seen. The question was, what would she do about it? The sun continued its arc across the sky, and Clara remained at her post, watching and waiting. She might be alone in her convictions, but she'd learned long ago that sometimes the most important discoveries came from watching what others were too busy to see. The peaceful morning shattered with a thunderous roar that echoed across the savannah. Clara's binoculars snapped toward the sound, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Through her lens, she spotted the source, a lion's den nestled beneath an ancient acacia tree, roughly 200 yards from her observation post. Time seemed to slow as she witnessed something extraordinary. A leopard, sleek and powerful, emerged from the tall grass like a golden ghost. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The big cat moved with purpose, its muscled shoulders rolling beneath its spotted coat. But there was something else in its movement, something that made Clara lean forward, gripping her binoculars tighter. "Wait," she whispered to herself. "That's not right." The leopard paused at the den's entrance, and Clara saw it. A moment of hesitation, a careful assessment that seemed at odds with pure predatory instinct. Then, in a blur of motion, the leopard lunged into the den. The sounds that followed were chaos, snarls, roars, the scattered bleating of nearby antelope fleeing the commotion. "Dr. Keene," Clara called out, her voice carrying across the camp. "Everyone, quick! Feet pounded up the wooden steps of the observation platform as other researchers rushed to join her. The leopard emerged from the den, and collective gasps rose from the gathered scientists. In its mouth, held with surprising gentleness, was a lion cub. "My God," Dr. Raymond Keene breathed, his silver hair catching the morning light. "That's something you don't see every day." The mother lion burst from the den, her roar shaking the very air, but the leopard was already gone, vanishing into the grass with its prize. Clara watched through her binoculars, tracking the direction of the bent grass stems. "Well, that's nature for you," Dr. Peterson said, shaking his head. "Brutal, but efficient. The cub's as good as dead." "I don't think so," Clara said, still watching the spot where the leopard had disappeared. "Did you see how it moved? How carefully it held the cub?" Dr. Keene turned to her, his expression a mixture of amusement and condescension. "Miss Whitfield, leopards don't adopt lion cubs. This isn't a Disney movie." "I'm not suggesting that," Clara responded, fighting to keep her voice steady, but its behavior was unusual. The hesitation before the attack, the way it carried the cub, it wasn't treating it like prey. The hesitation was merely calculating its attack, Dr. Peterson interjected. "Nothing more." "Perhaps," Dr. Keene said, patting Clara's shoulder in a way that made her feel like a child, "you're letting your Montana ranch background color your scientific observation. Nature isn't kind, Miss Whitfield. The sooner you accept that, the better researcher you'll become." The other scientists began to disperse, their excited chatter fading as they returned to their regular duties. Clara remained at her post, her cheeks burning with a familiar mixture of frustration and determination. She'd seen that same patronizing look throughout her academic career, when she'd insisted on studying zoology despite her family's protests, when she'd pursued this fellowship against her professor's advice. But she knew what she'd seen. The leopard's behavior didn't fit any pattern she'd studied. There was something more to this story, something the others were too quick to dismiss. Clara glanced at her watch, then at her already packed field kit beside her chair. She'd prepared it at dawn, expecting a long day of observation. Making her decision, Clara quietly gathered her equipment. She checked her water supply, emergency radio, and GPS tracker, all the safety essentials the program required. Then, ensuring no one was watching, she slipped down from the platform and began moving in the direction the leopard had taken. "I know you're different," she whispered, as if the leopard could somehow hear her, "and I'm going to prove it." The tall grass swallowed her figure as she moved carefully through the landscape, her years of tracking experience in Montana's wilderness guiding her steps. She could hear Dr. Keene's voice in her head, warning about the dangers of following predators alone, but Clara pushed the thought aside. Sometimes you had to break the rules to uncover the truth. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Clara followed. The trail, marking subtle signs, a bent blade of grass here, a faint paw print there. She moved slowly, methodically, her senses alert for any sound or movement that might betray the leopard's presence. Despite the heat and the risk, a sense of rightness settled over her. This was what she was meant to do, not just observe from a safe distance, but truly understand these magnificent creatures. She paused to make notes in her field journal, documenting everything about the leopard's behavior that had seemed unusual. The way it had approached the den, not with the typical predatory stealth, but with what almost looked like purpose. The gentle grip on the cub's scruff, so different from how leopards typically handled prey. Each detail strengthened her conviction that something extraordinary was happening here. Clara knew she was risking her position in the program by going off alone, but she couldn't ignore her instincts. Back in Montana, those same instincts had helped her track and document wolf behavior that others had missed. Her observations had challenged conventional wisdom about pack dynamics. Even though few had taken her seriously at first thought now, in the heart of the Kalahari, those same instincts were telling her that this leopard's story needed to be understood. Not dismissed as simple predation, but studied with an open mind and heart. Clara checked her compass and pressed on, following the trail deeper into the savannah, determined to uncover the truth that her colleagues were too quick to ignore. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs as she crouched low in the tall grass, following the subtle trail left by the leopard. The savanna grass whispered around her, golden stalks bending in the hot African breeze. Sweat trickled down her neck, but she kept moving, careful to maintain her distance while keeping the leopard in sight. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself, knowing full well how dangerous it was to track a large predator on foot. But something about the leopard's behavior nagged at her scientific mind. The way it had hesitated at the den, the careful grip on the cub, it all seemed deliberate, almost planned. The sun beat down mercilessly as she tracked the big cat through the brush. Her khaki shirt clung to her back, and her water bottle grew lighter with each careful sip. After nearly 2 hours of careful stalking, the leopard's trail led her to a rocky outcropping surrounded by thick vegetation. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she raised her binoculars. Through the powerful lenses, she could make out a natural den formed by fallen rocks. The leopard lay in the shade of the entrance, its spotted coat blending perfectly with the dappled shadows. But what made Clara's breath catch wasn't the leopard. It was what the big cat was doing. The stolen lion cub was alive. Not only alive, but seemingly unharmed, curled up against the leopard's side. As Clara watched, the leopard began to groom the cub, its rough tongue gentle as it cleaned the little lion's fur. The scene before her defied everything she knew about predator behavior. "This isn't predation," Clara whispered in awe, fumbling for her notebook while keeping her binoculars steady. "She's protecting it." The leopard's behavior became even more remarkable as Clara continued her observation. When the cub whimpered, the big cat nuzzled it softly, offering comfort in a way that seemed almost maternal. Clara noticed something else too: scars on the leopard's flanks, old wounds that told a story of past trauma. For the next 3 hours, Clara documented every detail. Her hand flew across the pages of her notebook, recording timestamps, behaviors, and interactions. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became almost unbearable. But she couldn't tear herself away from the extraordinary scene. The leopard showed no signs of aggression toward the cub. Instead, it displayed all the nurturing behaviors typically reserved for its own young. When the cub grew restless, the leopard played with it, letting the little lion paw at its tail and practice its wobbly stalking skills. "This challenges everything we think we know," Clara murmured, her excitement building as she sketched the scene. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just unusual behavior, it was revolutionary. It suggested levels of complexity in predator psychology that most researchers had never considered. As the afternoon wore on, Clara noticed how the leopard positioned itself between the cub and any strange sounds from the bush. Its protection wasn't just passive. It was active and intentional. When a troop of baboons passed nearby, the leopard immediately gathered the cub closer, sheltering it with its own body until the potential threat passed. The heat and exhaustion began to take their toll on Clara. Her water was almost gone, and her muscles ached from maintaining her hidden position for so long. But she couldn't leave, not when she was witnessing something so extraordinary. She had to document every detail, build an irrefutable case for what she was seeing. Through her binoculars, Clara studied the leopard's scarred face, noting the way its eyes constantly scanned the surroundings while keeping the cub close. There was intelligence in those eyes, and something else, something that spoke of past pain and present purpose. "You've lost cubs before, haven't you?" Clara whispered, a theory forming in her mind. The scars, the protective behavior, it all pointed to a history of trauma. Perhaps this leopard's unusual behavior wasn't just random. Perhaps it was born from its own loss, its own experience of having young ones taken away. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the savannah, Clara made her final notes. Her documentation was thorough. Timestamps, behavioral descriptions, sketches, and detailed observations about the leopard's protective positioning and nurturing actions. She had witnessed something that could change how scientists understood predator behavior and animal psychology. The evidence was clear and undeniable. This wasn't a simple case of predation gone wrong. The leopard wasn't treating the lion cub as prey. It was actively nurturing and protecting it. Every action she had documented pointed to deliberate, maternal behavior toward a cub that should have been its victim. Clara carefully packed away her notebook, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and excitement. She had what she needed: proof of behavior that would challenge conventional wisdom about predator interactions. Now she just had to convince her colleagues to look past their preconceptions and see what was really happening here in the Kalahari. The stolen lion cub was alive. Not only alive, but seemingly unharmed, curled up against the leopard's side. As Clara watched through her binoculars, the leopard began to gently groom the cub, its rough tongue smoothing the little one's tawny fur with surprising tenderness. "This doesn't make any sense," Clara whispered to herself, adjusting her position behind a thorny acacia bush. Everything she knew about leopard behavior told her this was impossible. Leopards were solitary predators, not surrogate mothers. Especially not to lions. They're natural competitors. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rocky outcropping as Clara settled in for extended observation. She pulled out her worn field notebook, its pages already filled with detailed notes about the region's wildlife. With trembling fingers, she began to document every detail of this extraordinary scene. Hours passed as Clara remained motionless, watching the unlikely pair. The leopard showed no signs of aggression toward the cub. Instead, it displayed all the nurturing behaviors of a mother cat, grooming, protecting, and even attempting to comfort the occasionally whimpering cub. As the leopard shifted position, Clara noticed something that made her gasp softly. The big cat's golden coat was marked with scars, not the usual marks from territorial fights or hunting injuries, but distinctive lines that Clara recognized from her anti-poaching work in Montana. These were the telltale marks of wire snares, the cruel tools of poachers. "Oh no," Clara breathed, her heart aching as understanding began to dawn. She focused her binoculars on the leopard's belly, noting the subtle signs that told the story of recent motherhood. The scarring pattern suggested multiple snares, probably from a concentrated trapping area. The pieces started falling into place. In Clara's mind, this leopard had lost her own cubs, likely to poachers' traps. The trauma of that loss had done something unprecedented. It had reshaped her maternal instincts, redirecting them toward another vulnerable young creature. The realization hit Clara like a physical blow, bringing tears to her eyes. She watched as the leopard carefully nudged the lion cub deeper into the shade of the den. The big cat's movements were protective but hesitant, as if she herself couldn't quite understand her own actions. Clara recognized the confusion in the animal's behavior, the conflict between instinct and emotional need. Looking through her binoculars again, Clara studied the leopard's scars more carefully. Some were old, white lines barely visible beneath the fur, but others were more recent, suggesting multiple encounters with human cruelty. The pattern of healing told a story of survival, of a mother who had probably fought desperately to free herself from the traps that took her cubs. Clara's hand shook as she made detailed sketches in her notebook, documenting every scar, every behavioral note. This wasn't just scientifically significant, it was heartbreaking. The leopard's actions weren't those of a mindless predator. They were the responses of a creature shaped by loss and trauma, reaching out in the only way it knew how. The sun was setting now, painting the savanna in deep oranges and purples. Clara knew she should head back to camp soon, but she couldn't tear herself away. She watched as the leopard settled down for the night, curling her body protectively around the lion cub. The sight stirred something deep in Clara's soul, a recognition of the complexity of wild creatures, their capacity for adaptation and emotion. In that moment, Clara knew she faced a moral crisis. If the other researchers discovered this leopard, they would see it as a threat, a dangerous predator that had stolen from a lion pride. They would never understand or accept what Clara now knew, that this was not an act of predation, but one of protection, born from an almost incomprehensible combination of loss and maternal instinct. She couldn't let them find this leopard. Whatever it took, she had to protect this extraordinary creature and the truth of its story. The leopard had already suffered enough at human hands. Clara refused to be party to causing it more pain. As darkness began to settle over the savanna, Clara packed away her notebook and prepared to make her way back to camp. She took one last look at the unlikely pair, the scarred leopard and the lion cub, both victims of circumstance, both finding unexpected solace in each other. The sight strengthened her resolve. Sometimes, she realized, the most important scientific discoveries weren't just about observing nature's laws, but about recognizing when those laws could be transformed by experience and emotion. The walk back to camp would be dangerous in the growing darkness, but Clara's mind was already racing with plans. She would need to be careful, strategic in how she handled this information. The leopard's life, and perhaps her own professional future, depended on what she did next with this knowledge. Clara trudged back to camp as the sun began to set, her mind racing with everything she had witnessed. The research station's metal buildings gleamed orange in the fading light, and she could hear the murmur of voices from the main laboratory, where the evening briefing would be taking place. Her hands clutched her field notebook tightly as she pushed open the door. Inside, the other researchers were already gathered around the conference table, with Dr. Raymond King standing at the head. His silver hair caught the fluorescent lighting as he turned to regard her late entrance with clear disapproval. "Ah, Miss Whitfield, how kind of you to finally join us," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of condescension. "Perhaps you'd like to share what was so important that it kept you from our scheduled meeting time." Clara took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "Actually, yes, I would." She stepped forward, opening her notebook. "I've been tracking the leopard that took the lion cub, and I've made some remarkable observations." A few of her colleagues exchanged skeptical glances. Dr. Keen's expression hardened, but he gestured for her to continue. "The leopard hasn't killed the cub," Clara explained, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "She's protecting it, nurturing it. I've documented clear maternal behaviors, grooming, guarding, even attempting to comfort it. But more importantly, I've discovered why." She flipped to her detailed sketches of the leopard's scars. "This female has lost her own cubs, recently, to poachers' snares. The trauma has altered her natural instincts." "Miss Whitfield," Keen interrupted, his tone dismissive, "while I'm sure we're all touched by your creative interpretation of events, this is a scientific facility, not a creative writing workshop." Scattered chuckles rippled through the room. Clara felt her cheeks burn, but she pressed on. "These are documented observations, Dr. Keen. I have detailed notes, timestamps, behavioral patterns. What you have," Keen cut in sharply, "is a sentimental fantasy that has no place in serious research. That leopard is a threat to the natural order. It has interfered with another predator's territory and stolen prey. This isn't a fairy tale about adoption. It's a dangerous anomaly that needs to be addressed. Clara stared at him, shocked by the harshness in his voice. Addressed? What exactly are you suggesting? The leopard needs to be removed, Keen stated. Flatly, I've already contacted the reserve authorities. They agree that an animal exhibiting such aberrant behavior poses a risk to the established predator hierarchy. Removed? Clara's voice cracked. You mean killed? Based on what evidence of actual harm? Based on decades of experience and scientific understanding, Keen snapped. Understanding that you, my dear, clearly lack. This meeting is adjourned. The other researchers began to file out, some avoiding Clara's gaze, others shooting her pitying looks. She remained rooted to the spot, clutching her notebook, until only she and Keen remained in the room. Dr. Keen, please. She tried one last time. At least look at my data before making this decision. He turned to her, his tall frame imposing. As he stepped closer, let me be very clear, Miss Whitfield. This decision is already made. If you wish to continue your work here, I suggest you focus on more appropriate research topics. One's better suited to your level of expertise. The threat in his words was unmistakable. Clara watched him stride out of the lab, her mind whirling. Something about his reaction felt wrong. Too quick, too harsh, too final. Why was he so determined to destroy this leopard without even considering the evidence? Later that evening, Clara sat in her small quarters, reviewing her notes. The leopard's scars kept drawing her attention. She'd seen similar marking patterns before, in cases where poachers had set up systematic trapping operations. The kind of operations that required inside knowledge of wildlife movements and reserve security patterns. A cold feeling settled in her stomach as she remembered rumors. She'd heard about certain researchers supplementing their income by providing information to hunting syndicates. She thought about Keen's expensive clothes, his new vehicle, his frequent unexplained absences from camp. What are you really hiding? She whispered, staring at her notes. The leopard wasn't just an inconvenient anomaly. She was evidence. Evidence of poaching activities that someone clearly wanted to eliminate. Someone with the authority to order a kill. Someone whose word would be taken without question by reserve authorities. Clara closed her notebook slowly, her hands trembling slightly. She had stumbled onto something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple case of unusual animal behavior. Dr. Raymond Keen's insistence on destroying the leopard wasn't about maintaining natural balance. It was about protecting secrets that could destroy his career and possibly land him in prison. This female leopard has extensive scarring consistent with snare wounds, Clara continued, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. She lost her own cubs to poachers several months ago. Dr. Keen's face darkened. That's quite enough, Miss Whitfield. Your anthropomorphizing of natural predator behavior is both unprofessional and misleading. But sir, the evidence, he cut in sharply, shows nothing more than typical predator opportunism. I'm recommending immediate action to eliminate this threat to the lion population. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. As her colleagues filed out after the briefing, she remained behind, gathering her materials with trembling hands. Something about Keen's reaction felt wrong. Too quick, too aggressive. That night, unable to sleep, Clara sat at her small desk in her quarters, her laptop casting a blue glow across her face. She began digging through the research stations. Permit records, looking for anything that might explain Keen's bizarre stance. What she found made her blood run cold. The permits showed irregular patterns, large blocks of time when certain areas were declared off-limits for research, supposedly for habitat protection. But these restricted periods aligned perfectly with peak trophy hunting seasons. Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard as she dug deeper, cross-referencing dates and locations. she discovered a pattern of email correspondence between Keen and various safari companies, carefully hidden in administrative folders. The language was coded, but clear enough. Research zones were being strategically closed to give exclusive access to paying hunters. Keen wasn't just aware of the poaching, he was facilitating it. Her heart pounding, Clara opened another folder labeled Financial Records. Inside, she found spreadsheets tracking payments from safari companies, disguised as research grants. The amounts were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled through shell organizations. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. The weight of the discovery pressed down on her shoulders. This wasn't just about one leopard or one lion cub. It was about years of systematic corruption. A creaking floorboard made her jump. Clara quickly closed the laptop, her pulse racing. Through her window, she could see Keen's office lights still on across the compound. She was alone with knowledge that could destroy not just a career, but an entire criminal enterprise. The next morning, Clara noticed subtle changes in how the camp staff interacted with her. Security guards watched her movements more closely. Her research access code suddenly malfunctioned. When she tried to access the station's satellite phone, she found it undergoing maintenance. During her afternoon field observations, she spotted unfamiliar vehicles visiting Keen's office, expensive SUVs with tinted windows. Through her binoculars, she saw men in safari gear exchanging handshakes with Keen, examining maps spread across the hood of their vehicle. Everything clicked into place. Keen's insistence on killing the leopard wasn't about protecting the ecosystem. It was about eliminating evidence that might expose his operation. A leopard showing unusual behavior would attract attention, bring more researchers, increase scrutiny. The same way Clara's observations had already begun to unravel the truth dot in her tent that evening. Clara sat on her cot, hugging her knees to her chest. The Kalahari wind whistled through the canvas, and somewhere in the darkness, a hyena laughed. She had never felt more alone. Her colleagues either couldn't or wouldn't see the truth. Keen controlled all communications with the outside world. And now she carried knowledge that made her a threat to powerful people. But as she looked at her research notes, at the detailed observations of the leopard's protective behavior toward the stolen cub, Clara felt her resolve strengthen. This wasn't just about scientific truth anymore. It was about justice. The leopard's scars told a story of survival against human cruelty, and now Clara understood why Keen was so desperate to silence that story. She carefully tucked her evidence into a waterproof sleeve, the permit records, the financial documents, her own observations. Whatever came next, she would need proof. As darkness settled over the camp, Clara made her decision. She couldn't fight this system alone, but she knew she had to try. The weight of truth settled onto her shoulders, heavy but necessary, like the Kalahari heat. Clara stared at her laptop screen, her heart pounding as the pieces fell into place. Dr. Keen's research. Permits aligned perfectly with known trophy hunting expeditions. The supposedly restricted areas masked reports of illegal hunting, activities she'd found in local news archives. She needed help, and she needed it fast. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Clara made her way to the airstrip where Jonas Mercer was doing his pre-flight checks on his bush plane. His weathered face broke into a warm smile when he saw her approaching, but it faded as he noticed her troubled expression. "Jonas, I need your help," Clara said, her voice low. "It's about Dr. Keen and the leopard situation." Jonas wiped his hands on a rag and gave her his full attention. "I've known you long enough to trust your judgment, Clara. What's going on?" She explained everything. The leopard's protective behavior, her discoveries about Keen's corruption, and her fear for both the leopard and the lion cub. Jonas listened intently, his steady presence calming her racing thoughts. "I believe you he said simply when she finished. "And I think I know someone else who will too. Let me introduce you to Tay Ndlovu." Later that afternoon, they met Tay at his tracking station on the reserve's eastern border. The seasoned tracker wore traditional beadwork accents on his worn field clothes, his sharp eyes taking in every detail as Clara shared her story again. "I have watched this leopard for many seasons," Tay said, nodding slowly. "Her behavior changed after the poachers took her cubs. Your observations match what I have seen." He touched a string of wooden beads at his wrist, a habitual gesture Clara would come to recognize as a sign of deep thought. "We need to return the cub to its pride," Clara explained, spreading out a map of the territory. "But we also need to protect the leopard. If King has his way, she'll be destroyed." Jonas leaned over the map, his shoulder brushing Clara's. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. "Here," Tay pointed to a section of the map. "The pride has been moving between these two water sources. And here," his finger moved to another location, "is where I last saw the leopard with the cub." They spent the next hour planning their strategy. Jonas would use his plane for aerial surveillance, keeping track of both the pride's movement and any unexpected visitors to the area. Tay would set up observation points in 3 key locations, using his tracking skills to monitor the leopard's patterns. Clara pulled out her research equipment. "I've got 3 motion-sensitive cameras we can use. They'll help us document everything, both for the cub's safe return and as evidence against Keen if we need it." "We'll need to move quickly," Jonas said, his voice carrying a note of concern that made Clara look up. Their eyes met, and she saw something there, worry for his safety, but also something deeper, something that made her heart skip a beat. Tay began sketching out a timeline in the dirt with a stick. "Tomorrow at first light, I will place the cameras. Jonas, you do your regular supply run as normal. We don't want to raise suspicion. Clara, you maintain your usual research routine, but focus your observations here and here." He marked 2 spots on the map. "What about the actual relocation?" Clara asked, forcing herself to focus on the plan rather than the way Jonas kept glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. "We wait for the right moment," Tay replied. "The pride must be settled. The leopard must be tracked, and Keen must be occupied elsewhere. Patience is our ally." They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing their equipment. Clara showed Tay how to position the cameras for optimal coverage while Jonas marked out safe landing zones near each observation point. The 3 worked together seamlessly, each person's skills complementing the others. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the savannah, Clara felt hope rising in her chest for the first time since discovering Keen's corruption. She wasn't alone anymore. She had allies who believed in her, who were willing to risk their own positions to help her protect both the leopard and the cub. "We should head back," Jonas said softly, touching her elbow. "It'll look suspicious if we're all out here too long." Clara nodded, gathering her equipment. As they prepared to separate, Tay pressed something into her hand, a small wooden charm on a leather cord. "For protection," he said simply. "My grandmother always said that those who protect the animals are protected themselves." Clara slipped the cord around her neck, touched by the gesture. The 3 of them stood for a moment in the gathering dusk, their commitment to their plan hanging in the air between them. "First light tomorrow," Jonas confirmed. "We'll make this work, Clara." As they parted ways, Clara felt stronger than she had in days. She had found her allies, a pilot who saw more than he said, and a tracker who understood the delicate balance of nature as well as she did. Together, they would find a way to save both the innocent cub and the traumatized leopard who had chosen such an unusual path of protection. Walking back to her quarters, Clara touched the wooden charm at her neck and smiled. Sometimes, she realized, The right people come into your life at exactly the right moment. Now she just had to make sure their plan worked before Keen could put his own deadly solution into action. The peaceful morning shattered with the distant sound of engines. Clara looked up from her observation post, where she'd been documenting the leopard's continued care of the lion cub. Through her binoculars, she spotted 3 rugged vehicles kicking up dust clouds as they approached the restricted area. Her radio crackled. "Clara, get out of there now." Jonas's voice carried urgent warning. Keen's called in his hunters. "They have permits, fake ones, but they're armed." Clara's hands trembled as she gathered her equipment. The leopard, sensing the approaching danger, growled softly and nudged the lion cub deeper into the rocky shelter they'd made home. Clara's heart ached. She couldn't leave them defenseless. "Clara," Tay's voice joined the radio channel. "They're splitting up to surround the area. At least 8 men with rifles." She crouched lower behind the rocks, watching as armed men in camouflage gear spread out through the brush. Their weapons weren't standard hunting rifles. These were military-grade firearms. Dr. King had clearly decided to eliminate all threats to his illegal operation. "I see you, my dear Clara." King's smooth voice carried across the clearing. He stepped into view, a high-powered rifle cradled in his arms. Such a waste of potential. If you'd only learned to look the other way, like everyone else. Clara's breath caught as she realized she was surrounded. Armed men emerged from 3 directions, their weapons trained on her position. She pressed herself against the rocks, mind racing. "It's over, Clara," King called out. "Come out now, and we can discuss your future. Stay hidden, and well ... He chambered around with an ominous click. The sound of an approaching engine cut through the tension. Jonas's bush plane roared overhead, flying dangerously low. The hunters ducked instinctively, and Clara seized her chance. She broke cover, running for denser brush. Shots cracked the air. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. Clara zigzagged, her lungs burning as she sprinted. She could hear Keen shouting orders, the hunters crashing through the vegetation behind her. She rounded a large acacia tree and found herself face to face with 2 of the hunters. Their rifles snapped up. Clara froze, her heart hammering. A blur of golden fur exploded from the shadows. The leopard launched itself at the nearest hunter, sending his rifle flying. The man screamed, scrambling backward as massive paws batted him aside. His partner turned to fire, but the leopard was faster, knocking him off his feet. Clara didn't waste the opportunity. She ran again, but more hunters were closing in. A bullet grazed her arm, sending sharp pain through her shoulder. She stumbled, fell, rolled behind a fallen log. The leopard appeared beside her as if summoned by her desperation. Instead of attacking, it crouched over her, its powerful body forming a shield. The big cat's muscles tensed, a rumbling growl vibrating through its chest. "Hold your fire," Keen shouted. "You'll hit the pelt." The moment of hesitation was all they needed. Tay burst from concealment, wielding a heavy branch like a club. He caught the nearest hunter across the back, sending him sprawling. Jonas appeared from another direction, tackling a second man. The leopard roared, the sound so primal it froze everyone in place. Then chaos erupted. The big cat charged forward, scattering the hunters like startled antelope. Rifles fired wildly into the air as men tripped over themselves trying to escape. Clara seized a dropped rifle, using it to keep 2 hunters at bay while Jonas and Tay fought hand-to-hand with others. The leopard continued its reign of terror, not seriously injuring anyone but creating perfect panic. King raised his rifle, aiming at the leopard. Clara swung her weapon toward him. "Drop it," she shouted. "It's over." "You don't understand what you're doing," King snarled, his silver hair wild, his composure finally cracking. "Do you know how much money?" The leopard spun toward him. and King's nerve broke. He turned and ran, leaving his scattered, retreating men behind. The sound of vehicles starting up and peeling away marked their defeat. Clara sagged against a tree, her arm throbbing. Jonas was immediately at her side, examining her wound while Tay kept watch. The leopard paced nearby, alert for any remaining threat. "Thank you," Clara whispered to the magnificent creature. The leopard met her gaze with intelligent eyes, acknowledging their connection. Then it melted away into the brush, returning to where the lion cub waited. "We need to call in the authorities," Jonas said, bandaging Clara's arm with supplies from his emergency kit. "Between your evidence and what happened here today, Keen's finished." Tay nodded grimly. "The land remembers," he said. "Today it chose its protectors well." Clara touched her bandaged arm, still scarcely believing what had happened. The leopard, a creature she'd been told was nothing but a simple predator, had risked everything to protect her, just as she'd fought to protect it. In that moment of connection, all her scientific theories had been proven in the most profound way possible. The sound of approaching sirens promised justice would soon follow. Clara leaned against Jonas, exhausted but determined. There would be statements to give, evidence to present, and a long fight ahead through official channels. But for now, she savored the knowledge that her trust in the leopard's complex nature had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Kalahari as police vehicles rumbled onto the reserve. There, sirens piercing the dawn silence. Clara stood with Jonas and Tay, watching as officers handcuffed the subdued poachers. Her heart still raced from their narrow escape, made possible by the leopard's unexpected intervention. "Miss Whitfield?" A senior police inspector approached, his badge glinting. "We've received your documented evidence against Dr. King. The photos, the falsified permits, the bank transactions. It's all quite damning." Clara nodded, her hands still shaking slightly. "Everything's there, Inspector. Years of corruption, working with trophy hunting syndicates, manipulating research data to hide illegal kills." Across the clearing, Dr. Raymond King sat in the back of a police vehicle, his usually immaculate appearance now disheveled. His silver hair was unkempt, his expensive safari clothes dusty and torn. The authority he'd wielded so forcefully had crumbled in the face of irrefutable evidence. "You'll never work in conservation again," one officer told him as he slammed the car door. Keen's face, once so confident and controlling, now showed only defeat. Jonas touched Clara's shoulder gently. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood up to him when no one else would." "We did it," Clara corrected him, glancing gratefully at both Jonas and Tay. "I couldn't have managed without you both." But their work wasn't finished. The lion cub, still under the leopard's protection, needed to return home. Clara led the small team toward the rocky outcropping where the unlikely pair had taken shelter. The leopard watched their approach, her scarred face alert, but somehow less defensive than before. "Easy now," Clara murmured, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "We're here to help." Tay, his years of tracking experience evident in every careful step, moved parallel to Clara. "The pride isn't far," he said. "They've been searching. I've seen their tracks." The leopard's behavior continued to amaze Clara. Instead of fleeing or attacking, she stayed close, watching as they carefully approached the cub. It was as if she understood their intentions, recognizing allies in their gentle approach. "Look at her," Clara whispered to Jonas. "She's not just protecting the cub, she's waiting for us to help." With expert care, they managed to secure the cub. It was healthy, well-fed during its time with the leopard. Clara couldn't help but marvel at how this traumatized predator had channeled her maternal instincts, turning tragedy into something remarkable. The reunion with the pride proved easier than expected. The lions had indeed stayed in their territory, and the mother's joy at recovering her lost cub was evident in her rumbling purrs. Clara and her team watched from a safe distance as the family reunited, the young cub bounding back to its siblings. "Now, for the final piece," Clara said, turning to the senior inspector who had joined them. "The leopard needs protection. She's not a threat, she's a survivor who's shown extraordinary behavior." The inspector nodded, reviewing the documentation Clara had provided. "Given the circumstances and your evidence, we'll ensure she's classified as a protected individual. No hunting permits will be issued for this area." Clara felt tears of relief well up in her eyes. The leopard stood at the edge of the clearing, her golden coat catching the sunlight. Their eyes met briefly, and Clara saw something there, not the mindless predator others had assumed, but a complex creature shaped by loss and resilience. "You know," Tay said thoughtfully, "many of our old stories speak of animals as teachers. This leopard taught us something important about healing from pain." Jonas squeezed Clara's hand. She had a good advocate, someone who saw the truth when others wouldn't look deeper. As the sun climbed higher, Clara watched the leopard disappear into the brush, free to roam her territory without fear of Keen's hunters. The morning's events had transformed the reserve. Where corruption had once held sway, justice had prevailed. Where scientific arrogance had dismissed unusual behavior, understanding had emerged. The police vehicles departed, taking Keen and his conspirators to face charges. Clara stood with her friends, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift from her shoulders. Her dedication to observation, her trust in her instincts, and her courage to stand against authority had not just proven her capabilities as a scientist, they had protected something precious. "What will you do now?" Jonas asked as they walked back to camp. Clara smiled, feeling the warm African sun on her face. "Keep watching, keep learning. There are so many things we still don't understand about these animals. But now we can study them honestly, without corruption twisting the truth." The Kalahari stretched out before them, wild and beautiful, its mysteries waiting to be understood by those willing to look with both mind and heart. Clara had proven that scientific observation could coexist with compassion, that understanding could triumph over exploitation. In the end, that might be the most important lesson of all. The following days brought a remarkable shift in the atmosphere at the research camp. Scientists who had once dismissed Clara's observations now approached her with genuine interest, eager to learn more about her methodology and insights. Dr. Sarah Chun, a senior researcher who had previously kept her distance, sought Clara out. During breakfast, "Your detailed observation logs are extraordinary," she said, spreading out Clara's notebooks on the mess hall table. "The way you tracked behavioral patterns and emotional indicators, it's groundbreaking work." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the steaming coffee in her hands. "Thank you," she said simply, though the words meant more than she could express. Throughout the morning, more colleagues stopped by her workspace. They asked questions about her documentation methods, her theories on animal behavior, and her insights into predator psychology. The same people who had once rolled their eyes at her sentimental approach now recognized that her emotional intelligence had unveiled scientific truths they had missed. Professor Martinez, visiting from Spain, even suggested collaborating on a paper about adaptive behaviors in traumatized predators. "Your work could reshape how we approach wildlife conservation," he said earnestly. "We've been too quick to dismiss emotional complexity in these animals." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Jonas found Clara sitting on her favorite observation platform. She was watching the distant figures of giraffes moving against the orange sky, their long necks like brushstrokes against the evening light. "Room for one more?" he asked softly. Clara smiled and patted the space beside her. As Jonas settled next to her, their shoulders touching, she felt the last of her professional isolation melt away. Here was someone who had believed in her from the start, who had seen her worth when others couldn't or wouldn't. "You know," Jonas said, his voice gentle in the gathering dusk, "I've been wanting to tell you something for a long time." Clara turned to face him, noting how the fading light softened his features. "What's that?" "I admired you from the first day you arrived here," he admitted. "Not just because you're beautiful, though you are, but because of your determination, your kindness, the way you see the world differently from everyone else." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. For so long, she had kept people at arm's length, focused entirely on her work. But now, with her research validated and her principles proven right, she found herself ready to open up to something more. "I think I've been afraid," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that caring about someone would somehow make me less of a scientist, less dedicated to my work." Jonas shook his head. "Clara, your capacity for caring is what makes you exceptional. It's what helped you see the truth about the Leopard when everyone else missed it." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara leaned against Jonas's shoulder. The Kalahari stretched out before them, wild and beautiful, but she no longer felt alone in facing its mysteries. She had found her place not just as a respected scientist, but as someone who could balance professional passion with personal connection. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said softly, and felt Jonas's arm tighten around her shoulders in that moment. Under the vast African sky, Clara knew she had found something precious: recognition for her work, justice for the animals she protected, and love with someone who understood her heart. The journey that had begun with a lonely stand against corruption had led her to a place of belonging, proving that sometimes the bravest choice was not just to fight for what's right, but to let love in along the way. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.